People ask it all the time. It's one of the biggest questions in science, or at least one of the most famous. Have we found the missing link? The question conjures up a specific image. We see a creature half ape and half human shuffling across a dusty plain. It's the breakthrough fossil, the one that connects us directly to our animal past. It's the final piece of the puzzle that makes the whole picture of human evolution clear. If we could just find that one bone, that one skull, everything would click into place. But that's not how it works. The idea of a single missing link is a myth. It's a powerful one, and it's been around for a long time, but it's based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what evolution is and how it happens. The search isn't for one specific creature. The reality is much more complex, and frankly, much more interesting. To get to the bottom of it, we first have to break down why we even think in terms of a link in the first place. For centuries, people viewed nature as a ladder. This idea was called the Great Chain of Being. At the bottom were simple things, like rocks and plants. Then came the simple animals, then more complex ones, then mammals, and at the very top, of course, was humanity. It was a straight line of progression from lower to higher forms. So when Charles Darwin's ideas about evolution came along, people just mapped them onto this old ladder concept. They saw evolution as a linear march of progress, with an amoeba at one end and a person at the other. If that's your model, then it makes sense to look for the rungs on the ladder. You'd expect to find a creature that is exactly halfway between an ape and a human. The missing link. Modern biology threw that ladder away a long time ago. The right metaphor for evolution isn't a ladder or a chain. It's a branching bush. Life doesn't move in a straight line, it diversifies. It splits. A single ancestral population can split into two, and those two can split into four, and on, creating a tree with millions of branches. None of those branches is higher or better than another. They are just different, each adapted to its own way of life. A shark is not a failed attempt at becoming a person. A shark is incredibly good at being a shark. So, when we talk about humans and our closest living relatives, chimpanzees, we didn't evolve from them. We did not descend from modern chimpanzees any more than you descended from your cousin. Instead, you and your cousin share a common ancestor, a grandparent. It's the same with us and chimps. If you go back far enough in time, about 6 or 7 million years ago, there was a population of ancient apes. They were neither human nor chimp. They were their own thing. Over time, that ancestral population split. One group went down a path that eventually led to modern chimpanzees and bonobos. Another group went down a different path that eventually led to us, Homo sapiens. So, scientists aren't looking for a missing link between a chimp and a human. They're looking for fossils of that common ancestor, and they are looking for all the different branches and twigs that sprouted off our side of the split after that. These fossils aren't weird hybrids. They are fully formed creatures perfectly adapted to their own time and place. Scientists call them transitional fossils or intermediate forms. A better way to think of it is that every fossil is a transitional fossil. Every species is a snapshot in a long, continuous movie of change. The term missing link suggests there's one gap to fill. But every time a new transitional fossil is found, it doesn't fill a gap. It creates two new ones. If you have species A and species C, and you're looking for the link between them, you might find species B great. But now you have a gap between A and B, and another gap between B and C. This is a good thing. It means our picture of the past is becoming more detailed, with higher resolution. We are adding more and more branches to the bush, making its shape clearer. To really see this in action, it helps us step away from human evolution for a moment. The human story is personal, so it's loaded with emotion and baggage. Let's look at some of the other great transitions in the history of life, where the evidence is just as powerful, if not more so. One of the biggest moments in life's history was the move from water to land. For hundreds of millions of years, vertebrates lived only in the sea. They were fish. Then, around 375 million years ago, the first four-legged animals, or tetrapods, appeared on land. For a long time, this looked like a huge, mysterious jump. How did a fish with fins and gills become a creature that could walk on land and breathe air? Scientists knew what to look for. They needed a fossil that had a mix of fish and tetrapod features. Based on the ages of known fish and early tetrapod fossils, they predicted that such a creature would be found in rocks of a certain age, around 375 million years old. They also knew that these rocks needed to have been formed in the right kind of environment, like a shallow freshwater delta or stream. So, a team of paleontologists led by Neil Shubin looked at a geological map of the world. They pinpointed a region in the Canadian Arctic where rocks of the right age and type were exposed at the surface. They went there, year after year, searching. and in 2004 they found it. They named it Tiktaalik. Tiktaalik is a perfect example of a transitional form. It's not a half fish, half lizard monster. It was a complete functional animal, but its body shows a beautiful mosaic of features. Like a fish, it had scales, gills, and fins with delicate fin rays. But like a land animal, it had a flattened skull with its eyes on top, like a crocodile. This suggests it was living in shallow water, looking up. It had a mobile neck. Fish don't really have necks, their head is attached directly to their shoulders. Tiktaalik could turn its head, which is useful for looking around on land or in the shallows. The most incredible thing was inside its fins. While they were still fins, not legs, the bone structure was different from any fish. It had a robust shoulder bone, an elbow, and even the beginnings of a wrist. It had the basic bone pattern of every four-legged animal that came after it, including you. Tiktaalik could probably do a push-up. It could prop itself up in the shallows or maybe even pull itself onto a mudflat. It wasn't a land animal, but it had the essential toolkit that would later be used for walking on land. It's not the missing link. It's a beautiful snapshot of one step in a long process. We now have a whole suite of fossils that show this transition, from fish with lobe fins to early amphibians with more and more robust limbs. Tiktaalik is just the most famous star of that show. Another classic example is the evolution of birds from dinosaurs. For a while after it was proposed, this idea seemed a little wild. How could a big, scaly T-Rex be related to a robin? But the fossil evidence is now overwhelming. The first major clue came in 1861 with the discovery of Archaeopteryx in Germany. It was found in limestone quarries that preserve fossils with exquisite detail. Archaeopteryx was a revelation. It had flight feathers, just like a modern bird. Its wings were clearly wings, but in many other ways it was a dinosaur. It had a jaw full of sharp teeth, not a beak. It had a long, bony tail, unlike the short, fused tail of modern birds, and it had claws on its wings, which it could have used for climbing or grasping. For over 100 years, Archaeopteryx was the primary example of this transition. It was held up as the link between birds and reptiles. But in recent decades, especially with discoveries from China, the story has become much, much richer. We now have dozens of species of feathered dinosaurs. Some had simple hair-like feathers, maybe for insulation. Others had more complex feathers on their arms and tails, maybe for display. Some, like Microraptor, had 4 wings, with flight feathers on both their arms and their legs. These fossils show that feathers didn't evolve for flight. They appeared first in dinosaurs that couldn't fly. Wings didn't appear overnight. They evolved from arms that were already covered in feathers, perhaps used for gliding from tree to tree, or for helping to run up steep inclines. The transition from dinosaur to bird wasn't a single step. It was a whole series of small changes, each useful in its own right. Archaeopteryx is no longer a single, lonely link. It's one point on a very crowded and bushy part of the family tree, showing just how dinosaur, like the first birds were, and just how bird, like many dinosaurs, had become. Now we can turn back to our own story, the human branch. Armed with the understanding that we're looking for a bushy tree, not a single line, the fossil record of our own origins makes a lot more sense. We have found an incredible number of fossils, not just one link, but hundreds of individuals representing more than 24 different species of early humans and their relatives. Together, they tell a sprawling, complicated story of evolution in action. Our journey begins after that split with the chimpanzee lineage around 7 million years ago. The very earliest fossils on our branch of the tree are subtle. They are still very ape-like. One of the earliest contenders is Sahelanthropus chichidensis, found in Chad and dating back almost 7 million years. We only have a crushed skull, but it holds a crucial clue. The foramen magnum, the hole where the spinal cord connects to the brain, is positioned underneath the skull, not at the back like in a knuckle-walking ape. This suggests that Sahelanthropus held its head upright and likely walked on 2 legs. Bipedalism. This seems to be the very first major innovation on the human line. A more complete early hominin is Ardipithecus ramidus, or Ardi, who lived about 4.4 million years ago in Ethiopia. Ardi was a game changer. When her skeleton was fully revealed in 2009, she was a mosaic creature. Her pelvis was modified for upright walking, but it was still wide and primitive. Her feet were bizarre. She had a grasping big toe, like an ape, which would have been great for climbing trees. But the other bones in her foot were more rigid, forming a platform for pushing off the ground when walking. She had long arms and fingers, suggesting she was still a capable climber. Her face was less projecting than a chimp's, and her canine teeth were small, a more human-like trait. Ardi tells us so much. She shows that upright walking evolved while we were still living in a woodland environment, not on an open savanna as was once thought. And she shows that different parts of the body evolve at different rates. We didn't just stand up, lose our hair, and get a big brain all at once. The first step was a new way of moving around, a kind of hybrid locomotion, part-time in the trees and part-time on the ground. Ardi is not a missing link. She is a species with her own unique combination of traits, giving us a precious glimpse into an early chapter of our evolution. Next on the scene are the Australopithecines, a very successful group of hominins that thrived in Africa for millions of years. The most famous of all is Lucy, a partial skeleton of the species Australopithecus afarensis, discovered in Ethiopia in 1974. Lucy lived about 3.2 million years ago. From her skeleton, we know for certain that she walked upright. Her pelvis is short and bowl-shaped like ours. Her thigh bone angles inward to the knee, which helps balance on one leg at a time while walking. We even have fossilized footprints from her species preserved in volcanic ash at Latoli, Tanzania, which show a modern human-like stride. But Lucy was not a small human. Her brain was tiny, only slightly larger than a chimpanzee's. She was short, maybe 3.5 feet tall. She had long arms and curved finger bones, which again suggests she was still spending a lot of time in the trees, perhaps asleep or escape predators. Her species was a fantastic success, lasting for almost 1 million years. They were essentially upright walking apes with small brains. They show that walking on 2 legs came long before the evolution of our big, clever brains. And Lucy's species wasn't alone. The fossil record from this period shows a bushiness of different hominin species. There were other more slender Australopithecines, and there was a separate, robust branch called Paranthropus. These hominins had massive jaws, huge chewing muscles anchored to a ridge of bone on top of their skulls, and enormous molar teeth. They were specialists, likely adapted for eating tough, fibrous plant material. They were a successful side branch of the human family tree that eventually went extinct. This diversity crushes the idea of a single, linear progression. For most of our history, there were multiple species of hominins living in Africa at the same time, competing and coexisting. The next major shift happens around 2.5 million years ago, with the appearance of our own genus, Homo. The first representative is often considered to be Homo habilis, the handyman. The name comes from the fact that fossils of this species are the first to be found consistently alongside simple stone tools. Compared to the Australopithecines, Homo habilis had a slightly larger brain and smaller teeth. The invention of tool use was a profound change. It opened up new food sources. With stone tools, our ancestors could butcher carcasses left by predators, getting at meat and protein-rich marrow. This new diet may have been the fuel needed for a more energy-hungry organ, a bigger brain. The story really accelerates with Homo erectus. The species appears in Africa around 2 million years ago, and represents a radical new kind of hominin. Homo erectus was built like us. Fossils like the nearly complete Turkana boy skeleton from Kenya show a creature with long legs, short arms, and a body perfectly adapted for long-distance walking and running. They lost the ape-like climbing features. They were fully committed to a life on the ground. Their brains were significantly larger than Homo habilis, though still smaller than ours. Homo erectus was a game changer. They were the first hominins to control fire. They made more sophisticated tools like the iconic teardrop-shaped Acheulean hand axe. And, most importantly, they were the first of our ancestors to leave Africa. Their fossils have been found across Asia, from Georgia to China to Indonesia. They were pioneers, spreading across the old world and adapting to new environments. They were an incredibly successful and long-lived species, lasting for well over 1.5 million years, far longer than Homo sapiens has been around so far. From this widespread population of Homo erectus, or a similar species, different groups evolved in different parts of the world. In Europe and the Middle East, they gave rise to the Neanderthals, Homo neanderthalensis. The Neanderthals are our most famous extinct relatives, and for a long time they were caricatured as brutish, dim-witted cavemen. We now know that this is completely wrong. Neanderthals were highly intelligent and adaptable. Their brains were, on average, even slightly larger than ours. They were powerfully built with stocky bodies and robust bones, which was a good adaptation for a cold climate. They were expert hunters, taking down large game like woolly mammoths. They made complex tools, cared for their sick and elderly, and deliberately buried their dead, sometimes with grave goods. This suggests a capacity for symbolic thought and compassion. They were not a failed experiment on the way to us. They were a parallel line of humanity, a different way of being human, that thrived for hundreds of thousands of years. Meanwhile, in Asia, another group emerged, the Denisovans. Our knowledge of them is much more recent and comes mostly from genetics. In a cave in Siberia, scientists found a tiny finger bone and a few teeth. They weren't enough to tell us what these hominins looked like, but scientists were able to extract ancient DNA from them. The DNA revealed a population distinct from both Neanderthals and modern humans. They were another branch on the family tree. And what about us? The fossil and genetic evidence points to our own species, Homo sapiens, evolving in Africa around 300,000 years ago. For a long time, we shared the planet with these other human species. We weren't the inevitable endpoint of evolution. We were just one of several human experiments running at the same time. Then, starting around 60,000 years ago, a small group of Homo sapiens left Africa and began to spread across the globe. As they moved into Europe and Asia, they met the Neanderthals and the Denisovans. And we now know from our own DNA that they didn't just replace them, they interbred. Most people today with ancestry outside of Africa carry a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA in their genomes. And many people in Asia and Oceania carry Denisovan DNA. These other forms of humanity didn't just vanish. A part of them lives on inside of us. This entire story, from the first tentative steps of Sahelanthropus to our technologically advanced global civilization, is messy. It's not a neat line. It's a thicket of branches with many dead ends and surprising connections. It's a story of mosaic evolution, of adaptation and extinction, of diversity and competition. Of course, the story is not complete. There are still gaps in our knowledge. There are periods of time from which we have few fossils, but it's important to remember that science is a process. It is always seeking new evidence, and when things go wrong, it has a way of correcting itself. A classic example of this is the cautionary tale of Piltdown Man. In 1912, an amateur archaeologist named Charles Dawson claimed to have found the missing link in a gravel pit in Piltdown, England. The fossils consisted of a large human-like brain case and an ape-like jaw with worn-down teeth. Like what many people expected the missing link to look like the brain of a person and the jaw of an ape. It perfectly fit the preconceived notion that the brain evolved first. It also satisfied a sense of national pride. England finally had its own ancient human ancestor to rival those found in Germany and France. This Piltdown Man was celebrated as a major discovery. But as more and more genuine hominin fossils were discovered in Africa and Asia, Piltdown Man began to look stranger and stranger. The other fossils, like the Australopithecines, show the opposite pattern. The body evolved for upright walking first, while the brain remained small. Piltdown just didn't fit. Scientists became more and more suspicious. Finally, in the 1950s, new chemical dating techniques were applied to the fossils. The tests proved what some had suspected. Piltdown Man was a deliberate fraud. The skull was from a modern human, and the jaw was from an orangutan. The teeth had been filed down to make them look more human, and the bones had been stained to make them look ancient. The Piltdown hoax is sometimes used by critics of evolution as proof that the whole field is untrustworthy. But in reality, it shows the exact opposite. It shows that science is a self-correcting enterprise. It's not about clinging to a belief. It's about following the evidence. When the evidence showed that Piltdown Man was an anomaly, it was questioned, re-examined, and ultimately exposed. The process worked. Bad data was thrown out. The real story, told by the genuine fossils, won. So, have we found the missing link? The answer is no, but the reason is not because our evidence is weak. The answer is no because the question itself is wrong. There is no single solitary link to be found. That's a relic of an old, outdated way of looking at life. What we have found is something far more wonderful. We have found a rich and growing collection of fossils that illuminate our family tree. We have Ardi, the woodland climber, who could also walk on 2 feet. We have Lucy, the successful bipedal ape. We have Turkana Boy, the long-distance runner who was ready to conquer the world. We have the Neanderthals, our intelligent and resilient cousins. Each fossil is a precious clue. Each one adds a new character, a new scene to the epic drama of our origins. The gaps that remain are real, but they don't invalidate the story. They just show us where to look next. Paleontology is like a giant puzzle with an unknown number of pieces. We don't have all the pieces, and we never will. But we have enough to see the picture clearly. We see a story of common descent, of gradual change, of branching and diversification. The search isn't for a single link to complete a chain. It's for a deeper understanding of the entire, sprawling, magnificent bush of life. It's about finding more of our long-lost relatives and learning their stories. The most profound thing is that the story is still going on. We are just one twig on one branch of this immense tree. And the quest to understand how we got here is in itself one of the most human things we do. The past is not missing. We just have to keep digging.